Hey guys, it's Richard from Web Nature. In this video I'm going to talk about the useRef hook. I didn't know what useRef did for a long time while programming React, and I really regret it now because I would have done things differently if I had known earlier. Before I begin, I want to mention that this video is sponsored by meetergo. meetergo is the newest and hottest scheduling and appointment app on the market right now. So if you want to support us, I would greatly appreciate you checking out the link in the description. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to start off by showing you guys a quick recap of why we have useState. So let's make a simple component here. So in this component now you could set up your state as you want, and we could even give it a type. So now let's make an input here, and we want the input to update our value whenever it changes. Also, let's show our value on the site itself. Testing this component, I know you guys are very excited about this. We will see that if we type something in our input, it also shows in our DOM. And as you all know, this happens because we are setting our value using setValue, which is the reason why React knows that it has to update the DOM to reflect our changes to this value. Now you may already see where I'm going with this, because now we're going to make another component. This component is going to be very similar, and here we're going to use useRef instead of useState. Now of course useRef doesn't return us a tuple, it simply returns the ref. The ref is actually an object, and we're going to stringify it to show what's happening to it. Now as you can see, ref is actually just an object that holds one property, which is current, and this is currently initialized as an empty string, which is exactly what we did in our ref component. You may already know that a ref is actually just an object with a mutable value inside. Current is that mutable value. So what we could try to do now is we could go and say onChange, and we can see what happens if we try to update our mutable value to our event current target value. This may seem very strange to you if you're used to writing React, but there are frameworks out there which actually use this syntax. So let's see what happens if we update our value. And as you can see, this is not reflected in our website. However, let's try to make a button here which will log our ref to the console. Now if we put something in our ref, as you can see, the value here is not updated, but if we log this to the console, you will see that current actually holds the value we just input in our input field. Now what's going on here? Well, the answer is actually quite simple. Remember, using useState gives us an actual function to use to set our state. This function also notifies React that the component the state is running in needs to re-render. useRef is a mutable value, and you don't use any function to set your value. As a result, React cannot know that you've updated your value, and it can also not know to update the DOM. And this is really the entire point of useRef. It can be seen as the counterpart to useState because it doesn't update the DOM when the value changes. And here's another important aspect: refs will always return the exact same value even between re-renders. And this makes useRef very useful in certain situations where you may be inclined to use state instead. But remember, state is really just a hook that we use when we want to update values and we want to reflect those updates in our DOM. It shouldn't really be used for anything else. But it's easy to forget this and to see useState as sort of the go-to way to store any value in React. But the reality is, if you do that, you're causing a lot of renders that are really detrimental to the performance of your app. So let's look at how we actually use useRef correctly with TypeScript. So we already made an example here, and now we're going to make our ref in our app component. So I'm going to say ref equals useRef. When you hover over your ref here, you will see that the type of your ref is React mutable ref object undefined. Now something that is kind of weird about refs is the way that they are typed. As you can see, the generic type for this ref is undefined. What does that mean? Well, if I try to access ref current and let's say make it a number, I immediately get an error. And why is that? 5 is not assignable to type undefined. What happened is I didn't give any initial value to my ref, which is why TypeScript assumes that my ref is always just supposed to hold undefined. This doesn't make a lot of sense, of course. So what we really should do is we should declare the type of our ref. Now what we've done is we've declared ref current to be a number, but we didn't give it an initial value. So what happened to this? It will infer the type to be number or undefined. Now you may think, why is it undefined if I'm immediately setting it to 5 one line later. Well, TypeScript doesn't know about that, and it's actually very true, because as the program is being passed, it goes to the lines line by line. When it sees this ref with an initial value undefined, it will create that ref with the current value being undefined. So that's why in this case the ref can be number or undefined. Now you may notice that if you pass in null, something weird happens, because it tells you that current is a read-only property. I'm not entirely sure why this happens, but this doesn't really mean that something really changed in reality. This only means that TypeScript has inferred this to be read-only, which would prevent you to reassign it. I believe this syntax is oftentimes used when you want to assign your ref to a component, because this is a very important use case for refs. You're oftentimes going to find yourself putting those on components. The way you would do this is by saying ref on a component and setting it to ref. What this will effectively do is it will set ref current to this component in the DOM. So at this moment, ref current will hold an actual DOM node, which in this case is a div. Now it's still giving us problems here because we declared the type of this ref to be a number. However, since we are assigning this to a div element, we should say that the type of this is also a div element. As you can see now, TypeScript doesn't complain anymore because everything is typed correctly. I don't think there is a real difference between initializing a ref to null or undefined, but in general, I think you will find yourself initializing a ref to null if you're assigning it to a component, because then the current value of ref is correctly inferred to be a read-only value, which should be the case because you are letting React handle the value of this ref. If you're gonna, however, use ref for something else, such as assigning values by yourself, it's better to pass the initial value to be undefined, because then TypeScript will not infer the type of this to be a read-only property. So these are the important things you have to keep in mind when you're dealing with refs. And now I want to show you a couple of use cases where it's better to use useRef instead of useState. If we take a look at our ref current, we can see that it's in div element or null, which is why most of the time when dealing with a ref, we have to check if it has a value inside first. Checking out ref.current in this block, you will realize that this is literally the DOM node. So in here we can call any method or access any property of this element in our DOM. And this is the first use case of refs, which is also what it's used for most of the time, focusing elements. So I can say ref current.focus. Now of course we're dealing with a div here, but this is more useful for components such as inputs, because it will put our focus, our cursor, right in the input. Combining this with a useEffect hook, this is a very real example of how you can imperatively focus one of your components. From here you can also add event listeners or check if your DOM node contains certain other DOM nodes. There's a video there where I showed you how to make a React component that can detect a click outside of another React component. I'm sure I'm not going to forget to add this info card. So this is the first and very real use case that you may have seen before or not. But now I want to show you some more examples that will demonstrate why useRef is often forgotten in favor of useState. Let's remove all of this stuff here and let's make a button that says count clicks, and whenever we click this button we're gonna increase the amount by 1. Then we want to have another button. When we click that one, what we want to do is we want to console log that the button was clicked X amount of times. Also we're going to make a quick use effect here where on every render we want to console log that I rendered, I being the computer. Now if you check this out, as you can see here, when we start our button was clicked 0 times. Now notice then when I press on my button here, every time this component renders, and if you actually see what's happening here, you will see there's no difference. Now when I click log, you see that it counts correctly, but in fact it was rendering every single time that we clicked on that button when it didn't have to. And this is a great example of a situation where we will often use state just because it's the way we do it, but we don't realize that this actually has a performance impact on our app that we don't really want. Now in this example, this may not seem very dangerous, but imagine this being a component that actually renders many more components. This could lead to actual performance issues. So what should we do instead? Well, if we change this thing to actually use ref. We learned that refs don't cause the DOM to update. So let's try to rewrite this with using the ref up there. So I'm gonna use a ref of a number. And instead of using the state setter, we have to do it the JavaScript way, and we have to say ref current equals ref current plus 1. Now we can initialize this value to 0 because that's the actual initial value we want. Remove it from this component, of course. And when we log it, we will of course log ref current. So as you can see, here's our first render. Let's count some clicks and you see no renders are happening. If I log it, however, it still counts the amount of clicks correctly. Isn't this cool? And remember, this works because a ref is just a normal JavaScript object that doesn't depend on a component's lifecycle like state does. For the same reason, refs can actually also help us avoid closure issues that can happen very quickly in function components. So if you take a look at this example, we are using a set timeout to console log a stateful value after 2 seconds. And we can also change this stateful value by clicking on this button. So if I reload the site and increase the count a couple times, and you can see that after 2 seconds it actually logs 0, even though at this point I've already clicked the button 8 times. Remember, whenever we are clicking this button and we are updating the state, the component is re-rendered, so the value we get from the state is like a new value. If, however, we do the same thing and now we're looking at the ref instead, and I increase the count of the ref, you will see that it immediately logs the correct value because this ref is a value stored in memory. At the time when this is console logged, it will look at the actual value, which is mutated by us directly, so it's also reflected in our console log. The same problem happens if you're using set interval. So what you will see here now, every 2 seconds it's going to log the count to our state. Now if I try to increase the count of the state, you will see it's still logging 0, and now it's actually made another interval which is now counting 1 every single time. If I click again, you will see there are 3 intervals running at the same time, and each is going to count the exact same value every single time. This is not the same when I use the ref. As you can see, it still starts by logging 0 every 2 seconds, but if I increase this now, it's still only logging 1 value and it's actually logging the correct value. So you can see that this has a real big impact on the actual performance of our component that we cannot underestimate. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I thought it was pretty cool when I learned about what useRef really does, and I certainly felt like I should have known this much earlier in my career. This is the end of the video and it's my chance to tell you about meetergo. meetergo is the hottest scheduling and calendar management app on the market right now. This entire app is financed and made by us, webnature, so if you want to support us and this channel, we would greatly appreciate you checking it out. meetergo gives you the ability to send a link to anyone where they can see your calendar and book an appointment with you. You can even set the price for a meeting and take payments directly through meetergo. Check out the link in the description where you can get several months for free. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you in the next one.